Okay, what do Greenland, Madagascar, and Cuba all have in common? Take a second and really think about it. Well, there's some of the largest, most vibrant, and biologically diverse islands on Earth, right? These are places teeming with unique life that you literally cannot find anywhere else. But to kick things off today, consider this incredibly surprising fact. Despite their massive ecological importance, not a single one of these islands has an easily found, dedicated national biosecurity plan. They're effectively flying blind against some of the greatest environmental threats on the planet. How is that even possible?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, first-of-its-kind systematic review of global island biosecurity to see exactly how humanity is currently protecting, or totally failing to protect, its most vulnerable ecosystems. And the stakes here literally couldn't be higher. Without robust biosecurity, islands are just sitting ducks for invasive species, which can swiftly trigger total ecological collapse. We have a lot of ground to cover to figure out who's actually doing this right.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're covering the Island Biosecurity Challenge, mapping global protection, what drives a plan, tourism versus fisheries, and finally, the aquatic governance gap. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the Island Biosecurity Challenge. To truly grasp this, we have to understand just how incredibly rare these dedicated biosecurity plans actually are.
The researchers behind this study basically played the role of global data detectives. They set out to find every single active island biosecurity plan out there, launching hundreds of searches. They started off with 341 full-text documents, but what they found was a massive, honestly alarming scarcity. They had to toss out 300 of those texts right away because they just didn't meet strict, actionable biosecurity definitions. So what were they left with? An incredibly exclusive club of just 41 official plans worldwide. Let that sink in. Out of the thousands of islands on this planet, only 41 active plans met the criteria. Moving to Section 2, Mapping Global Protection. With only 41 robust plans on the books for the entire world, you kind of have to wonder, where exactly are they? If you were to map out the active plans across the globe, you'd see tight clusters of protection grouped around places like Australia, New Zealand, parts of Europe, and North America. But the real story? It's the massive, unprotected gaps. Huge stretches of the planet are just completely off the biosecurity radar, and that includes many of the world's most biologically diverse and fragile islands. Compare some of the world's largest islands and a really stark pattern emerges. You've got places tied to developed nations, like Great Britain and the South Island of New Zealand, and they have dedicated, well-funded biosecurity plans ready to go. But then you look at developing nations with highly vulnerable biodiversity hotspots, places like Madagascar and Cuba, and they have absolutely nothing. It paints a painfully clear picture. Economic resources largely dictate ecological defense. If you have the wealth, you build the wall. If you don't, you're left completely exposed. But hold on, because there is one number that just completely hijacks this entire global data set. And that number is 32. Yup, 32. That is the staggering number of plans managed by Australia alone. It gives them a massive lead over other developed nations like the US, New Zealand, and the UK. Their secret? Instead of trying to force one giant, clunky umbrella policy over the whole country, they heavily decentralized. They created hyper-targeted strategies for individual islands like Tasmania or Barrow Islands. And it's brilliant, really, because a one-size-fits-all plan is totally useless when every single island has its own completely unique ecosystem. All right, Section 3, what drives a plan? This builds perfectly on what we just saw. What specific characteristics actually get an island into this highly exclusive biosecurity club? Researchers mapped the data using a decision tree model to figure this out, and they found a quantifiable formula for protection. It basically breaks down like this. If an island has 2 or more World Heritage sites, or if it sees over 36 million international tourists, boom, it is highly likely to have a protective biosecurity plan. The core takeaway here is pretty wild. Global recognition and massive tourism dollars are measurable drivers for environmental protection. Simply put, we protect what people want to visit. Which sets us up perfectly for Section 4, tourism versus fisheries. This is where we see a huge critical divergence. The primary type of economy an island relies on actively shapes its blind spots. With tourism, the focus is almost entirely terrestrial. Humans fiercely protect tourist spots because visitors travel to see pristine cultural and environmental assets on land. Nobody wants to pay for a vacation and see invasive rats scurrying across a beach, right? But with fisheries, That exposes our aquatic environments to extreme risks. Fishery plans are fundamentally driven by extraction, trade, and production. It highlights a really troubling clash between our human values, our wallets, and the actual biological threats out there. To uncover this sharp contrast, researchers used a statistical tool called multiple correspondence analysis. By grouping islands with similar traits, they basically built a family tree of island protection. And the data was crystal clear. An island's economy completely dictates what parts of its ecosystem it decides to protect. Bustling tourist destination, you protect the land. Exporting tons of fish, your risks are almost entirely concentrated in the water. Ultimately, our environmental protection is driven heavily by the economy.
And that brings us to our final section, number 5, the aquatic governance gap. Let's zoom back out to the global stage.
We are looking at a massive, dangerous gap in how we govern our borders. Think about it. Traditional imports and exports, like shipping crates, are heavily regulated by strong national and international governments. But fisheries? The rules are completely fractured. They rely mostly on local or regional municipalities. It's absolutely absurd. Highly regulated international laws govern a crate of bananas crossing the ocean, but massive fishing operations are just left to an underfunded local town to figure out. The result is that our aquatic environments lack any cohesive national oversight.
And this local fracture leads directly to a massive systemic nightmare. As the researchers note, vessel biofouling remains a persistent global pathway for new invasions. Biofouling is basically just marine debris and organisms attaching themselves to the submerged parts of boats. Because our oceans are seamlessly interconnected, this is a relentless threat. A small, under-resourced municipality literally does not have the jurisdiction or the funding to stop a massive international cargo ship from dropping off a devastating invasive species right in their harbor.
But here is the absolute wildest part of this whole thing. The ballast water, the water held inside a ship for stability, is strictly governed by binding global rules. But the biofouling on the outside hulls of those exact same ships? Completely voluntary guidelines. Voluntary. It's literally like installing 10 deadbolts on your front door to keep intruders out, but leaving your back door wide open and just hoping for the best. This giant loophole leaves our marine ecosystems dangerously exposed. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this one thought. Based on all the hard data we've just walked through, are our global biosecurity plans actually designed to protect our most vulnerable ecosystems, or are they just there to protect our most profitable tourist attractions? Until we actively bridge this massive governance gap between terrestrial and aquatic protection, are we truly safeguarding the planet, or are we just putting a giant protective fence around the gift shop? It's a critical question we need to answer before it's too late. Thanks for exploring this fascinating research with me.